Hello everybody and welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, and I've got something a little bit different for you guys today. We're going to have a little bit of an in-depth look at the current political situation in the UK, owing to this channel being called Anglo Election Insights, as in the Anglosphere. I do intend to cover more sort of UK, New Zealand, Canada, the US, the sort of political going-ons in those countries as well as Australia, but of course for now we have our upcoming federal election, which is taking a lot of the focus. But we'll give a little bit of an update on the UK today. But firstly, just looking at some late count in WA, as we can see, Labor's up to 44 seats now. We've only got 5 uncalled seats according to the ABC. It's coming right down to the wire in Callabunda. And then we're still waiting on some results in Pilbara and Kalgoorlie before we can really definitively call them. I think it's a case of not even quite knowing who's going to make the two candidate preferred in a couple of these seats as well. Albany is another example. But yeah, still haven't got the absolute sort of final results in. And Aussies Elect did have a video out last week kind of going through some of the federal implications of the WA election. So I would encourage you to have a look at that if you're looking for a bit of analysis, but for the moment I'm just happy to wait. Second order of business is the Port Macquarie by-election, which I previewed last week, and it was held on Saturday night. As we can see, there is still some count out there, but it's mostly like a couple of pre-polls and some postals. Everyone's basically called it for the Liberals. But it was, a half-decent result for the Nats, who, and thanks to Tally Room, Ben Rowie for this map, they were able to win quite a lot of these outlying rural booths, as well as the more kind of inland sort of industrial parts of Port Macquarie. But the Liberals did quite well on the postals, on the pre-poll that's come in so far, and in these more sort of swanky, retiree, nice coastal parts of the electorate, as well as down in Laurieton, where their candidate was from, I believe. I don't really know if we can draw much from this result other than the fact that the Nationals brand is still holding up in these regional areas, even in these regional cities. So it's not sort of a slam dunk for the Liberals in a seat like Lyne or Richmond, or at the state level somewhere like Coffs Harbour or Tweed Heads. Whereas I think a lot of people are generally thinking that the Liberals should actually be running in seats that the Nationals either hold or are sort of the major opposition party, like in Hunter. But I think this by-election shows that, maybe had they not flubbed their candidate selection in the first place, then that's very well could have won it. So I think it's probably not one we can draw too many conclusions from, and it's not really telling us much of a story about what's going to happen federally in Cowper either. I think if there was a more decisive result for the Liberals, we could probably say that the Nationals brand is well and truly on the wane in these kinds of places, and that might be a problem in Cowper, but I don't think this result really reflects that. So let's get down to business, everybody. We're going to look at the UK. So starting off, this is the 2005 general election. This is Tony Blair winning his third election. And I just want to have a look at this map. So as we can see, Labour doing quite well in Scotland. They've got this sort of core block in the northeast, and then this red wall starting sort of around Liverpool, through Manchester, all the way through southern Yorkshire, and then, in a good year for them, down into the Midlands as well, towards Birmingham. Southern Wales, very strong, and of course London as well. So keep that map at the front of your mind. So then we're going to go to 2019. This is Boris Johnson finally winning that sort of firm mandate that he was hoping for in order to get on with the Brexit negotiations and pull Britain out of the EU, and he got it. So looking here, we can see the SNP doing extremely well in Scotland, kicking Labour out just about, and this area through the Midlands, very, very strong for the Tories this time round, and pretty much kicking the Liberal Democrats off the map in the southwest and through the centre of the country, up in the east as well. But as you can see, Labour still has this core block up in the northeast. The red wall has been severely damaged, but it's still there to some extent, particularly in the urban centres around Liverpool, around Manchester, and then into sort of Sheffield and southern Yorkshire and southern Wales as well. Labour still hanging on. So that was 2019. Let's have a look at the results from the last election last year. And yeah, so Labour gaining back a lot of ground in Scotland, really expanding upon this core block in the northeast, and they've rebuilt that red wall and actually expanded upon it down through the Midlands, done really well in South Wales, done extremely well in London, and they're even, very, very competitive in sort of the east and some of these more like rural constituencies to the north of London and even Kent. So a really particularly good year for Labour, but that all changes when we look at the nowcast model. Now, I can't say I know a whole heap about this nowcast model. From what I understand, it's based more on polling, and then some sort of famous British psephologist has put together a model that is fairly accurately predicts elections at the constituency level, sort of like MRP, but not quite, I think. And yeah, let's just have a look at this map. So we see a new colour here, teal. That is Nigel Farage's Reform UK party, who have basically been the story of British politics since the 2024 general election. So the Labour government under Keir Starmer has faltered. They've become deeply unpopular very quickly over a number of different issues, whether it was scandals related to campaign donations and expenditure, or continuing problems with immigration, the economy, that sort of thing. But they're having an extremely rough time, and their honeymoon was cut extremely short. But it's not been the Tories who have really made up the ground. A very colourful map compared to, say, what we saw in 2019. We'll go through in a little bit of detail. One sort of good way to look at it is the change. So firstly, we can see that the SNP are recovering from a lot of that lost ground from 2024, and even in the seats that they don't that they're not projected to win, they're quite close behind the Labour Party in some of these. Yeah, you can see very small margins. So it could be the case that the SNP are just about ready to sort of retake Scotland in the way that they did in 2019 if an election were held now. But the real story again here is reform. You can see all different parts of the country from, Kent to the east, and then, particularly through the Midlands. But I want to go through in a little bit more detail and just show some of the more remarkable aspects of the Reform Party's gains, or according to this nowcast model. So I mentioned Kent. This is a part of the UK that's typically been very conservative. You can see here, if you look at the 1920 there, or 1924 there, you can see both of those elections that went to the Conservatives, and these are gains for the Reform Party. So quite remarkable that a seat could go Tory twice in those two very different elections, and then suddenly Reform's basically coming from nowhere to potentially winning that constituency. You can see it on a few different ones here in Kent. Also sort of east of London up into Essex. Again, more sort of typical conservative country. And yep, heaps of different examples. And then moving up into the Midlands, again, this is more sort of Tory areas, and Reform just making huge gains coming across into the central Midlands. So this is more where Labour made up a lot of ground in 2024, but that support seems to be quite soft looking at the current nowcast. And then where it gets really remarkable is in the northeast. Have a look here. These constituencies, you can see the red 19 and 24. Even in 2019, a really weak year for Labour, this seat went to Labour in that election. So this is heartland Labor territory. And Reform are projected to win several of these constituencies. And then as you go into the ones where Labor is still ahead, it's not by much. And look at the second party. It's Reform knocking on the door. Same thing as we head down more sort of towards Yorkshire and in towards Liverpool. Here, the Tories had a good result in 2019, and they were a big part of breaking up that sort of red wall. But a lot of these seats, again, you can see the double red, heartland Labor territory. And then, again, Reform in second place in some of these other constituencies where Labor is still ahead. And the same thing in southern Wales. You can see there Reform coming second, and some of the margins are extremely close between the two parties there. The other sort of big story is that, actually I'll just stick to this viewer, the Tories are going to find it extremely difficult to ever form a majority with Reform polling this well, but also the Liberal Democrats having gone nowhere. They managed to win 70-odd seats in the last election, mostly at the Tories' expense in this sort of southern, more kind of affluent part of the country, particularly in the southwest. And the nowcast model is showing that the Liberal Democrats are not giving up any of these gains, and they're really solidifying their position in a lot of these seats. So these kinds of constituencies that the Tories really need in order to form majority government, they don't look to be moving back to the Tories at all, whereas Labor, they're losing heartland seats to Reform. And if we scroll down here, you can see that neither major party is getting anywhere near a majority, and even Reform and the Conservatives together wouldn't be able to form a majority at this rate. So really, really interesting political developments coming out of England according to this nowcast model. They also have council elections coming up in May 1, and there's been this sort of scandal with it. So since the 2024 general election, these are the sort of accumulative results of council by-elections. You can see that the Conservatives have made some gains, mostly at the expense of Labor. Labor have done very poorly since then, but the big beneficiaries have been Reform, who've won council by-elections against both the Conservatives and Labor. And just looking at the seat count and the vote share, you can see Reform here on 12 coming from nothing. Labor obviously losing quite a few seats. The Tories, they have made some gains but also lost some to Reform and to the Liberal Democrats. You can see that the vote share here, Reform have gone from basically nowhere up towards 10%, mostly at the expense of Labor, and the other parties, not really a great deal of movement there. But these May 1 local council elections have actually been delayed in 9 of the areas, which has sparked a lot of controversy because both Labor and the Conservatives are poised to lose control of a lot of these different local councils to both the Liberal Democrats, particularly like Devon, Cornwall, up into Gloucestershire. These sort of types of Tory-held local councils are very much under threat from the Liberal Democrats, whereas then Lincolnshire, Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Doncaster, these kinds of areas are more under threat from Reform. So had all of these local elections taken place as originally planned on May 1, the losses on both Labor and the Conservative side would have been quite severe looking at the current polling. The reason they did it was to sort of create, it was some sort of restructuring that they wanted to do, and so they've delayed the elections in order to complete the restructuring and then have the elections under the new sort of system. But, both Reform and the Liberal Democrats have widely panned the decision, and they're basically calling it a massive scandal. So really interesting, and it'll be quite interesting to see if that impacts the races that are going ahead on May 1. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that everything is going rather well for the Reform UK Party, but as we can see here on this opinion polling graphic, they're just slightly experiencing a change of fortunes here. You can see that sort of almost hockey stick-like bend right at the end. And the reason probably is that they've just kicked out one of their 5 MPs, Rupert Lowe, who it was, as the story goes, there were these sort of trumped up allegations of bullying, but Rupert Lowe himself is claiming that basically he was becoming a bit of a threat to the influence and leadership of Nigel Farage, and it's escalated quite a lot, and apparently quite a few Reform UK members have left, and it's becoming very much a sort of bitter war of words within the party. And it's not very timely because there's an upcoming by-election in Runcorn and Helmsby, which is somewhere up near Liverpool, I think. And this seat poll found that Reform were actually leading Labour in this particular seat. And I think if I go to the Nowcast, it's somewhere up in this sort of part of the country. And it's one of the seats where... now that I'm looking for it, there's no way I'll find it. But I did have a look at it before, and it's one of the seats that Labour actually holds, according to the Nowcast. But this Lord Ashcroft poll, and I don't know a great deal about this pollster, but it's saying that effectively when you wait for the likelihood of voters actually turning out, because of course the UK doesn't have compulsory voting, and nor do they have preferential voting, they actually found Reform would be leading by several points. So the key here is that a lot of unhappy Labour voters from 2024 are planning to either vote Reform or sit it out. Very, very interesting. So I hope that's given you guys a little bit of an update on what's happening in the UK. I'll go into a little bit more depth, perhaps prior to or after those local council elections, where we have a few more numbers to work with. And maybe once the Australian federal election's done. In the meantime, if you're interested in following UK politics, this channel here, Election Watch, is quite new, but very informative, really good coverage of by-elections and council elections and polling and that sort of thing. A little bit like this video, a lot of focus on Reform, but that's mostly because they really are the story of British politics. So if you're interested, I'll include a link below in the description, but a very good channel to keep an eye on, and relatively unbiased from what I can tell. So that'll do for today. Thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed something a little bit different. I want to do a little bit more of it. I did set the channel up hoping to cover the entire Anglosphere, perhaps with more intimate detail for Australian politics, but I do want to keep my audience across political developments across the Anglosphere. So hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, hit the like button, comment your thoughts below, and of course if you're new, subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you back here. Thanks everybody, enjoy the rest of your day.